The first thing they tell you when you move to Harrow's End is, don't ask about the 40-year rule. I was 10 when my parents bought the old Miller place, a sagging farmhouse on the North Road. My first night here, I woke to a sound I'd never heard before, a deep, resonant horn that seemed to tremble in my chest. It was followed by silence, so heavy it pressed against my ears. The next morning, I asked my mother about it. She shushed me so quickly her nails scratched my wrist. My father muttered something about old customs and wouldn't meet my eyes. It wasn't until I met Ruthie Barnes, the oldest woman in town, that someone finally gave me a straight answer. She sat on her porch chewing licorice, her gaze sharp as she told me, every 40 years, Harrow's End gives the land what it's owed, one life for the rest. I laughed, thinking she meant a story, some backwoods superstition, but her face didn't crack. Last time was '83, she said, leaning close enough for me to smell the black molasses on her breath. That means it's due this winter. I didn't understand the weight of it until I saw the wall. It stands in the center of town, 8 feet high, blackened by age and soot. Names are carved deep into the stone, one for each sacrifice. There are 25 names, one every 40 years, and at the bottom, space for the next. The wall sits at the heart of Harrow's End, a monument nobody celebrates. No flowers, no candles, just stone and shadow. I first saw it up close in late October, when the maples along Main Street had bled their leaves into the gutters. The air smelled of damp earth and chimney smoke. I'd been sent to pick up milk from the general store, but my feet carried me to that slab of blackened stone instead. The names weren't in neat lines. They were gouged in with different hands, some careful, others jagged, as if carved in a hurry. Beside each was a date. The oldest read 1723. I ran my fingers over one name, Elias Ward, 1903. The grooves were so deep they could have drawn blood if I pressed harder. I wondered who had carved them and if their hands had been shaking. Behind me, footsteps crunched on wet leaves. Sheriff Dalton stood there, his bulk casting a long shadow over the wall. His badge caught the dying light, glinting like a warning. "You shouldn't be here, boy," he said. His voice was low, not unkind, but final. I asked him why. He looked at the empty space beneath the last name. Margaret Shaw, 1983. His jaw tightened. "Because one day, you'll know too much. And knowing too much in this town gets you chosen." He left without another word. The sound of his boots faded, but his meaning stayed. That night, I dreamed of the wall again. Only this time, the empty space at the bottom wasn't empty. It had my name in it. The Saturday market in Harrow's End always smelled of apples, wood smoke, and something faintly metallic, like rusted nails after rain. It wound through the square in crooked rows of stalls, each one sagging under jars of honey, baskets of corn, and venison jerky wrapped in brown paper. I should have been helping my mother choose preserves, but instead, I wandered. Every few steps I caught people watching me, quick glances that slid away the second I met them. Near the cider stand, 2 old women leaned close, whispering. I didn't hear much, just the words "do" and "boy." It made me think of the wall, and the way Sheriff Dalton had looked at me like I'd already made some kind of mistake I couldn't take back. I ducked between stalls, pretending to browse. That's when I overheard Mr. Kinney, the butcher, talking to a man I didn't recognize. 40 years ain't long enough," the stranger said. His voice had a rasp to it, like dry leaves scraping the ground. "Town's been spoiled." Kinney's reply was quiet, but I still caught it. "Don't matter, it's the agreement. One life for the land's plenty." They noticed me then, the stranger's eyes fixed on mine, gray, cloudy, and cold as the river in January. He didn't blink. My chest felt tight, like I'd swallowed something sharp. When I got back to my mother, she asked why I looked pale. I told her I didn't feel well. She pressed a hand to my forehead, nodded, and said we'd go home. But as we left, I saw the stranger again, watching from the end of the row. He smiled and raised a finger, pointing directly at me. Our farmhouse sat a mile from town, the road curling past fields of brittle corn and a line of dark pines that creaked in the wind. By the time we got home from the market, clouds had rolled in, heavy and bruised, threatening rain. I couldn't shake the image of the stranger pointing at me. My mother busied herself in the kitchen, but I kept glancing toward the window, half expecting to see him in the yard. Just after sundown, I did. He stood at the gate, hands folded neatly in front of him. The fading light made his face hard to read, but I could see that strange gray in his eyes, pale as storm water. He didn't move, didn't call out. I told my mother. She went to look, but when she got to the window, he was gone. That night, a tapping woke me. Not on the window, on the wall, just beside my bed. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I sat frozen, every muscle locked tight, listening to my own heartbeat thud in my ears. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, the yard was empty. The gate was swinging open. In the morning, my father found something hanging from it, a small bundle wrapped in black cloth. Inside was a length of white twine, knotted 12 times, and a piece of bone no bigger than my thumb. He burned it in the wood stove without a word. At breakfast, neither of my parents spoke to me. They didn't have to. I could feel it in the way they wouldn't meet my eyes. Something had begun. And it had begun with me. My father was a quiet man, but after the bundle appeared at our gate, he seemed to retreat into himself completely. He spent most of the next day in the barn, sharpening tools that didn't need sharpening, his face drawn and pale. That night, after my mother went to bed, I found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. Only the red tip of his cigarette glowed in the gloom. "You saw him at the market, didn't you?" he asked without looking at me. I nodded. He exhaled, smoke curling toward the ceiling. "His name's Silas Crane. He only comes to town when it's close." "Close to what?" I asked. "The 40 year," he said, his voice tight. "When I was a boy, it was Thomas Ellery, chosen in the winter of '83. They took him from his bed." The word "took" made my stomach knot. "Who took him?" My father didn't answer. Instead, he stubbed out his cigarette, stood, and poured 2 glasses of water, one for me, one for himself. His hands trembled. "Your mother thinks you don't know enough to be afraid yet," he said, setting the glass in front of me, "but fear's the only thing that might keep you alive." I asked him what the bundle meant, the bone, the knots. He stared at me for a long time, then said, "It's a claim." Outside, the wind rattled the eaves, and somewhere in the distance, a low horn sounded. It was the same sound I'd heard my first night here, deep enough to shake the glass in the windows. My father didn't flinch. He just whispered, "It's starting." The horn sounded again the next night, long, low, and hollow, like it had been blown through stone instead of brass. I woke in the dark, my breath clouding in the cold air of my room. Fog had swallowed the yard. It moved like something alive, curling against the walls, seeping between the slats of the gate. I slipped out of bed and padded to the window. Through the shifting white, I saw shapes moving along the road. Not cars, not horses, people. They walked in single file, their heads bowed, each holding a candle cupped in both hands. The light flickered on their faces, but no one looked up. The horn sounded again, and they stopped. A figure stepped from the fog ahead of them, Silas Crane. Even through the glass, I could see the pale of his eyes. He raised one arm, pointing down the road, toward the heart of town. The procession moved on. I pressed my hand to the window, leaving a ghost of my palm on the glass. I thought I saw Silas pause, tilting his head like he could feel me watching. Then his gaze lifted. It locked on mine. I stumbled back from the window, my heart slamming against my ribs. By morning, the fog was gone. No footprints in the dirt road, no candle wax on the ground. My mother acted like nothing had happened, though her hands shook as she stirred oatmeal. I told my father what I'd seen. He just said, "Don't watch them again." But I couldn't stop thinking about those bowed heads, moving towards something I couldn't see, and how Silas Crane had seen me. 2 days after the fog, my father left before sunrise. He didn't say where he was going, but I watched from my window as he headed toward town, his coat collar turned up against the wind. By mid-morning, I couldn't stand the curiosity. I followed. The streets were nearly empty. A thin frost coated the porch rails. glittering in the pale light. I trailed my father until he slipped inside the old Methodist church. I crept to the side door, the one that led to the basement stairs. The smell hit me first: damp stone, candle wax, and something faintly sour, like rotting fruit. Voices rose from below. I moved down slowly, my steps muffled by the worn carpet. Through the crack in the basement door, I saw them. 15 people seated in a circle. Sheriff Dalton, Mr. Kinney, even Ruthie Barnes. And at the center, standing like a preacher before his congregation, was Silas Crane. "Must be done properly," Silas was saying. "The land demands balance. Delay will only make the price higher." Dalton nodded. "We've had 40 good years. Crops, game, water, all steady. But the signs are here. The time's close." Someone asked who would be chosen. Silas smiled faintly. "It's already been decided." His eyes shifted to the door, to me. My stomach dropped. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing on the stairs. By the time I reached the street, my hands were numb, though I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from what I'd just heard. When my father came home that night, he didn't mention the meeting, but he didn't look at me either. I woke the next morning to find a smear of red on my pillow. My first thought was a nosebleed, but when I touched my face, there was nothing. The stain was on the fabric only, 3 thin lines drawn close together, like claw marks. At breakfast, I pushed my plate away and asked my father if he knew what it meant. He froze mid-bite, my mother's. Fork clinked softly against her plate. "Where exactly?" my father asked. I told him. He didn't eat another mouthful. Instead, he rose, took the pillowcase, and stuffed it into the wood stove. The smell of burning cotton and something faintly metallic filled the kitchen. "It's nothing you need to worry about," he said, but his voice was too fast, too tight. Later, while splitting kindling out back, Ruthie Barnes hobbled up the path. She looked at the bare patch of dirt where the grass never grew and said, "So, he's marked you." I told her I didn't know what she meant. She tapped her temple. "You think a sacrifice is just picked at random?" "No, boy. The land whispers its choice. That mark is how we know." The sound of an axe striking wood echoed from the barn. My father, listening. Ruthie leaned closer. "If you want to live past the 40-year, you'd best find a way to make it whisper someone else's name." Then she turned and shuffled away, her shadow stretching long in the afternoon light. I stood there, gripping the axe handle so hard my palms ached, and realized something awful. Everyone in Harrow's End knew, and none of them were going to stop it. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house felt like a footstep, every gust of wind like a breath on the back of my neck. Around midnight, I heard my father leave his room. His boots thudded softly across the floorboards, then down the stairs. I followed. The kitchen was dark, but a thin strip of light spilled from the cellar door. I crept down, the air turning damp and cold. My father sat at the old workbench, a thick leather-bound book open in front of him. The pages were yellowed, brittle at the edges. I stayed in the shadows, watching as he traced the columns of ink with one finger. Each page listed a year, a name, and something else. Odd phrases like failed harvest reversed or flood averted. Then I found the page for 1983, Margaret Shaw, sickness lifted. My father sighed, turned the page, and there it was, an empty line beneath the year 2023. Beneath that was my name, already written in careful, deliberate script. I must have made a sound because my father's head snapped up, his eyes locked on mine, and for a moment neither of us moved. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said finally. "Then why is my name there?" My voice shook. He closed the book gently like it was something sacred. "Because the land's already chosen you, and once it chooses..." He trailed off, shaking his head. The silence pressed in around us, broken only by the faint drip of water somewhere deep in the cellar. I didn't wait for him to finish. I ran back upstairs, but the truth followed me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. By morning, frost silvered the grass, and the air had that still, brittle quality that made every sound feel sharper. I didn't want to see my father, so I left early, wandering the edges of the cornfields. That's when I saw it. A rabbit hanging from the fence post by its hind legs. Its fur was slick with frost, its throat slit clean, the blood frozen into a dark crust. Around its neck was a thin piece of white twine, knotted 12 times, just like the one in the bundle left at our gate. Pinned to the post above it was a scrap of parchment, stained dark in spots. The handwriting was jagged but deliberate. 10 nights. I pulled it free, my fingers stiff from the cold. The message seemed to burn in my palm despite the chill. Behind me, crows gathered on the bare branches, their calls sharp and mocking. I stuffed the paper into my pocket and hurried home. My mother was in the kitchen, humming softly, but when she saw my face, the humming stopped. I showed her the parchment. She read it once, then folded it in half and placed it in the wood stove without a word. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "Gone to town," she said, too quickly. "Don't go outside after dark." That night, the horn sounded again, low and mournful. I lay in bed counting heartbeats, wondering if each one was part of the 10 nights ticking away. Somewhere out in the dark, a man's voice spoke my name. Not shouted, just said it, like we were standing face to face. And I realized I didn't have 10 nights. I had already begun running out of time. I didn't tell my father about the voice in the dark. If he already believed the land had chosen me, I wasn't going to give him more reason to treat me like a dead man walking. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house felt purposeful. I kept the lamp burning low, the shadows long and restless across my walls. Sometime after midnight, I heard the gate latch click open. I crept to the window. Moonlight painted the yard in silver and black. A figure stood just inside the fence, tall, coat hanging loose, head tilted slightly like he was listening for something. It was Silas Crane. He didn't move toward the house. Instead, he knelt and pressed his palm flat to the ground. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear the words. The earth beneath his hand seemed to tremble, just barely, a shiver through the soil. Then he stood and turned his face upward, straight toward my window. I dropped below the sill, heart pounding, afraid to breathe. After a long moment, the horn sounded from somewhere far off, and Silas walked back toward the road. I stayed crouched there until I heard the gate close. In the morning, I found a single object where he'd knelt, a flat stone carved with 3 parallel lines, the same shape as the mark on my pillowcase. The grooves were filled with something dark and dried. When I showed my mother, she went pale. "Don't touch it again," she said. I didn't, but I kept it. Because deep down, I knew it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. The second night came with rain, cold, steady, and unending. It hammered the roof and turned the dirt road to black mud. I told myself Silas wouldn't come in weather like this. I was wrong. Around 2 in the morning, a sharp crack of wood woke me. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and moved to the window. The gate lay on the ground, split in 2 like something had torn through it instead of latched it. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw muddy footprints. Bare footprints. They led from the road, across the yard, and stopped directly beneath my window. I staggered back, aiming the light downward again, this time catching a flash of pale skin. Someone was still standing there. The beam caught his face for only a second, but it was enough. His features were thin and sharp, his mouth stretched into a smile too wide to be friendly, and his eyes, they were the same cloudy gray as Silas's. Before I could move, he lifted a hand and tapped one finger slowly against the glass. 1, 2, 3. Then he turned and walked back into the rain, barefoot on the gravel road, leaving no prints where the water pooled. By morning, the rain had stopped. The footprints were gone, washed clean. But a new scrap of parchment had been nailed to the porch rail, the ink smeared, but still legible. 9 nights. I didn't tell my parents. The way my father had been watching me lately, I wasn't sure he'd stop them from taking me. And the truth was sinking in. This wasn't just a ritual. It was a hunt. By the 3rd day, I could feel it in the way people looked at me. When I walked into the general store, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Holloway, who'd sold me penny candy since I was 10, wouldn't meet my eyes. The man behind me in line muttered something under his breath, too low to catch, but I knew my name was in it. On Main Street, a group of boys my age lingered outside the hardware store. I'd grown up with them, played baseball in the summer, shoveled snow together in winter, but as I passed, one of them spat at my feet. "Guess you won't be needing that shovel this year," he said, grinning. They all laughed. At the post office, Ruthie Barnes cornered me. "Don't go near the church," she whispered, her hands clutching my sleeves. "They'll be meeting again soon, deciding the details." Her eyes darted toward the street. "And once they've planned it out, there's no undoing it." I asked her why no one tried to stop it. Her voice went cold. "You think those good crops, that clean water, those fat deer in the woods, just happen?" She let go of my sleeves, her nails leaving crescent marks in my skin. "Everything has a cost." When I got home, the gate had been fixed. Not by my father. The wood was pale and new, but burned into the top slat were 3 words in black, uneven letters. "We are coming." That night, the horn didn't sound. The silence was worse, because it meant they didn't need to warn me anymore. They were already close. The 4th night, the wind screamed through the pines, bending them until they creaked like breaking bones. I stayed awake in bed, every muscle tense, my ears straining for anything beyond the wind. It came just after 1, a faint metallic scrape downstairs, like a latch being worked open. I slipped from bed, grabbed the heavy flashlight from my desk, and crept to the landing. Below, the front door stood wide, letting in bonds of cold air. A shape moved in the hallway, tall, stooped slightly, its shoulders brushing the walls. My father wasn't home. He'd gone into town hours ago and hadn't returned. The shape turned its head toward me. Its face was half in shadow, but I saw the gleam of wet teeth. I bolted for my room, slamming the door and shoving the dresser against it. The knob rattled once, twice, then stopped. Silence. I thought maybe it was over until the window latch clicked. The glass lifted an inch before I threw myself at it, slamming it shut and locking it. Through the pane, pale fingers rested on the glass, tapping once, slow, deliberate. Then they withdrew into the dark. When my father came home just before dawn, I told him everything. He didn't ask questions, didn't act surprised. He just poured a drink, sat at the kitchen table and said, "They're not supposed to come this soon." That chilled me more than anything else, because it meant the rules weren't being followed. And if they weren't following the rules anymore, there was no telling what they might do next. By the 5th night, I knew waiting would get me killed. If they could come into the house, there was nowhere safe to hide. So I decided to set a trap. In the barn, I found an old steel snare my father used to catch raccoons raiding the chicken coop. I oiled the hinges, tested the spring, still strong. Then I dug a shallow hole just beyond the new gate, covering the trap with loose dirt and dead leaves. My plan was simple. When they came, I'd catch one. Maybe then I'd have something to bargain with, or at least answers. The night was quiet, unnaturally so. Even the crickets had gone silent. I waited just inside the front window, flashlight ready. It was near midnight when I saw movement at the edge of the yard. A figure stepped forward, barefoot, coatless, its skin almost glowing in the moonlight. Slowly, it moved toward the gate. I held my breath. It stepped into the trap. The jaws snapped shut with a metallic crack. The figure collapsed to the ground, letting out a sound that didn't belong to any human. Low, guttural, almost like an animal's growl and a scream twisted together. I rushed out with the flashlight and froze. The thing in the trap wasn't Silas, or even a man. Its skin was pale and too smooth, its eyes black as pitch. The teeth that gnashed up at me were sharp and uneven. It thrashed once, twice, and then the trap broke. It scrambled to its feet, bleeding but grinning, and whispered, 8 nights, before vanishing into the dark. When I looked at the trap, the steel was twisted out of shape, as if it had been bent by something far stronger than hands. I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mangled trap. The words echoed in my head. 8 nights. Whatever it meant, it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. When the first gray light crept through the window, I went straight to the archives in the old town hall. The building smell, ed of mildew and dust, the air heavy with the weight of 100 years of secrets. I rifled through brittle newspaper clippings and leather-bound ledgers until I found what I didn't know I was looking for. A faded ledger dated 1883. On one yellowed page, written in precise, looping script, was a list of names. 40 of them, each followed by a date. The intervals were exact, 40 years apart. Next to the last name, written in red ink, were 2 words: Blackmouth. The notes that followed were in a different hand, messier, almost frantic. It wears a man's shape, but is not a man. It takes the voice of the dead to draw the living near. The Blackmouth comes for one every 40 years, or it comes for all. My stomach turned. The last entry was from 1983. The math was simple. This year was the next. I kept reading until I found the part that made my hands shake. If the chosen is not given willingly, the Blackmouth will claim the town itself. A creak echoed from the far end of the hall. I turned, expecting empty air. Instead, a man stood there, tall and thin, dressed in an old deputy's uniform that hadn't been worn in decades. His mouth was stretched unnaturally wide, teeth black and glistening. When he spoke, it was my father's voice. 8 nights left. I froze. My father's voice didn't belong in that thing's mouth. It was wrong, too wet, too heavy, each word slithering like it had to crawl out of his throat. I blinked, and the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no door opening, just gone, but the air still carried the stink of rot and damp earth. By the time I made it home, the sun was sinking. I kept telling myself it was just a hallucination, stress making my mind bend, but I couldn't shake the way it had looked at me, like it was already measuring my grave. I locked every door, drew every curtain, and loaded the shotgun. Midnight crept in heavy and cold. Outside, the wind pressed against the house in long, steady sighs. At exactly 1 o'clock, the phone rang. An old rotary phone I didn't even use anymore. I let it ring, heart pounding, until the answering machine clicked on. "Son," my father's voice said, "I need you to open the door." I gripped the shotgun tighter. He'd been dead for 12 years. The voice continued, soft now. "If you don't, someone else will pay instead." Every instinct screamed at me to smash the phone, but I couldn't move. I just listened as the sound faded into a wet, rattling chuckle. Then, 3 knocks on the front door. Slow, measured. I aimed the shotgun and crept forward, each step louder than the wind. I could see a shadow under the crack, tall, unmoving. I shouted that I was armed. The knocks stopped, silence. But when I glanced at the clock, it wasn't 1 anymore. It was 2, and in the reflection of the glass door, behind my own trembling face, something grinned. By morning, I was running on coffee and nerves. The knocks, the voice, the grin, they clung to me like smoke. I thought maybe telling someone would make it feel less real, so I went to see Hank Larson, the only other person in town who'd ever admitted the old curse might be more than just a story. Hank ran the bay, the shop near the lake. When I walked in, he was pale, hands trembling around a cup of black coffee. Before I could speak, he said, "You saw it too, didn't you?" The words froze me. "What did you see, Hank?" He swallowed hard. "Last night, about 2:30. Thought I heard someone outside my shop. Looked through the blinds, saw a man standing under the streetlight." "That's not so strange," I said, though my voice felt thin. Hank shook his head. "Wasn't a man. His mouth, it stretched, right across his face, opened wider than a head should. Like it was smiling but wrong, and the sound, like 100 people whispering my name all at once." My skin prickled. "I grabbed my rifle," Hank continued, "but by the time I got to the door, it was gone. Street was empty. But there was something on the ground." He slid a crumpled piece of paper across the counter. I unfolded it. My own name was scrawled across it in thick black ink. "Hank," I whispered, "why would it leave this for you?" He met my eyes, fear swimming in his. "It didn't. There's one in your mailbox, too." I didn't wait to finish my coffee. The drive back to my house felt longer than it should have, and when I pulled up, the little red flag on my mailbox was standing straight up, waiting. The paper was cold in my hands, as if it had been sitting in ice. My name was written in the same jagged black strokes Hank had shown me, letters uneven, almost carved into the page. I stood in the middle of my driveway, staring at it, debating whether to burn it, toss it, or just leave it there and pretend I never saw it. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, made me tear it open. The first thing that struck me was the smell: damp earth, mildew, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. Inside was a single sheet, no greeting, no signature, just 8 words. You can't run from what you were born for. The handwriting matched the outside, erratic, sharp, wrong. A gust of wind rattled the trees, and I swore I heard my name whispered in it. I spun around. My yard was empty, but I felt the weight of being watched. I crumpled the letter and shoved it in my jacket pocket, my hands shaking. Hank had been right. This thing wasn't random. It was choosing people. Inside the house, I locked every door and window. I told myself I'd throw the letter away later, but when I looked in the trash that night, it wasn't there. It was on my pillow. The words had changed. Same handwriting, different message. Midnight, the lake. The clock on my wall ticked louder than it should have. Midnight was 5 hours away. I didn't know if I should go or run, but some part of me already knew there was no running. The road to the lake was swallowed in darkness. My headlights barely cut through the fog, which rolled off the water in thick, shivering waves. Midnight had come too fast, each tick of the clock pulling me here like a leash. When I stepped out of the truck, the cold hit hard, colder than it had any right to be in August. The moon was a thin smear of light above the tree line, its reflection trembling on the black water. I walked to the shore, gravel crunching under my boots, my breath visible in short, ragged bursts. The lake was still. Too still. Then I saw it. A figure stood on the dock, motionless. Even from a distance, I knew it wasn't right. Its shoulders were too narrow, head tilted at an unnatural angle, arms hanging longer than they should. It didn't move, but I felt it looking at me. Something shifted beneath the surface of the water beside the dock, breaking the reflection. A ripple spread outward, slow and deliberate. I should have turned around. Instead, I stepped closer. The boards creaked under my weight as I set foot on the dock. The figure still didn't move, but now I could hear something, faint whispering, like dozens of voices speaking at once, all in a language I didn't know. When I was halfway down the dock, the figure turned. Its face, or what was left of it, was stretched too thin, eyes black and wet, mouth gaping wider than it should have, the whispering pouring out of it in a freezing rush of air. The water erupted behind it. Something massive rose from the lake, dripping and formless, its surface crawling with human faces, and every one of them was screaming my name. The thing rising from the lake blotted out the moon. Water cascaded from its shifting mass, the sound like rain hitting a coffin lid. Dozens, maybe hundreds of faces swam just beneath its glistening surface, each straining toward me with mouths open wide. They weren't random. I recognized them. Deputy Harris, Old Man Kellerman, the missing Riggs twins, people I'd seen on milk cartons, in old case files, or standing behind "Have you seen me" flyers stapled to telephone poles. Every one of them mouthed my name in perfect unison. The whispering from the figure on the dock grew sharper, louder, like broken glass dragging over my eardrums. My knees buckled. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the words sank straight into my skull. I understood now. It wasn't speaking a foreign language, it was speaking memory. My own memories, twisted and bent until I couldn't tell what was mine and what belonged to the thing in the water. The dock groaned beneath me. The pale figure had moved without sound, now standing inches away. Its stretched face was still, but the whispering poured out of its mouth like steam from a vent. I couldn't move. The water being leaned closer, and dozens of its faces pressed against the surface as if against glass. They began to merge, melting together into one vast, shapeless head with hollow sockets. Then it spoke, not in whispers, but in a voice so deep it rattled the air. "You belong here." The dock snapped. I plunged toward the black water, the screaming faces rushing up to meet me. For a heartbeat, I was certain they weren't trying to drag me under. They were trying to pull me in. The cold hit like a wall, stealing my breath the moment I sank beneath the surface. I fought upward, but something coiled around my wrists and ankles, slick, rope-like, impossibly strong. The lake wasn't dark here. It glowed, faint and green, as though lit from somewhere far below. Shapes moved in the depths, slow, deliberate, too large to be fish. Then the faces appeared again, drifting past me like photographs in a current. Some were peaceful, most were screaming. Their eyes locked on mine, pleading, but every time I tried to reach one, the water thickened around me, pulling me deeper. My lungs burned, panic clawed at my mind. A shadow rose from the glow, a doorway. Not wood, not stone, something older. Its frame was made of black, jagged bone, and beyond it was a corridor stretching downward into endless light. The whispering returned, louder now, coming from inside my head. This time it wasn't just my name. It was every mistake I'd ever made, every regret, every moment I wished I could change. They weren't just memories, they were offers. The ropes tightened, yanking me toward the doorway. A dozen hands, some rotting, some pale and new, reached from the glow to welcome me. Something in my chest cracked, not bone, but resolve. The figure from the dock was here too, drifting effortlessly in the water, its stretched face inches from mine. It mouthed 3 words I felt rather than heard. "Step through, Sheriff." I kicked wildly, tearing free of one rope, then another. My lungs screamed for air. The glowing doorway pulsed, and I felt it. Warmth, safety, home. But I also felt the pull of the surface above, and I had 1 second to choose. I broke for the surface. Every muscle burned, but the thought of stepping through that thing, whatever waited on the other side, terrified me more than drowning. I tore free from the last rope and clawed upward. The water seemed thicker now, as if it resented my decision. The whispers turned into a roar, 100 voices shouting at once. Some promised salvation. Others swore I'd regret this forever. My vision blurred. The light from the doorway dimmed below me, shrinking to a single ember before vanishing. My chest convulsed. My body begged to breathe. And then, air. I burst through the surface, gasping, dragging in lungfuls that felt like fire. Rain hammered down, blinding me. The dock was empty. The figure was gone. Only the lake's ripples betrayed that anything had happened at all. I swam for shore, every stroke heavier than the last. The mud sucked at my boots as I hauled myself onto solid ground. I collapsed on the grass, coughing until bile burned my throat. That's when I noticed my hands. They were pale, too pale, and the skin wasn't just wet, it was soft, like it had been submerged for days. I scrambled to my feet, but the world tilted sideways. The rain no longer felt cold. My heartbeat sounded far away, muffled, like I was hearing it from underwater. Down at the shoreline, the surface of the lake shimmered unnaturally. Faces floated just beneath it, watching, and one of them was mine. It smiled. Before I could scream, the rain stopped. Everything, trees, shore, sky, hung motionless, as if caught in glass. The lake whispered my name again. This time I didn't know if it was calling me back, or telling me I'd never left. I staggered back from the water, heart pounding in my ears, though each beat felt faint, like an echo. My boots sank into the wet earth, but the sensation was wrong. Too light, too distant. The forest around me was still. No wind, and no insects. Even the rain that had pounded my skin moments ago hung suspended in midair, droplets frozen like tiny glass beads. I reached for one. My fingers passed through it. The faces beneath the lake drifted closer, pressing against the surface without breaking it. Their eyes glowed faintly, an otherworldly silver. My reflection stood among them, watching me with a knowing expression. "You crossed," it said, though its lips didn't move. I shook my head. I didn't go through the door. The reflection's grin widened. "You didn't need to. You breathed us in." Panic clawed up my throat. I glanced toward the tree line, the truck, the road. Escape. I sprinted, but each step carried me no farther. The trees remained the same distance away, no matter how hard I ran. From behind, the lake whispered again, each syllable a needle sliding into my skull. The voices overlapped, some pleading, some laughing, some chanting words I couldn't understand. My hands were worse now, the skin wrinkled and gray like drowned flesh. My fingertips left wet marks on my jeans. My lungs ached, not from lack of air, but from holding in something that wanted out. The reflection stepped away from the water's edge. Its feet didn't disturb the ground. It raised a hand and beckoned. "You belong on this side," it said. The frozen rain began to fall again, but upward, returning to the clouds. The lake rippled. Something cold coiled around my ankles and pulled. The grip around my ankles tightened, icy and unyielding. I kicked hard, but whatever held me was stronger. My boots slid deeper into the mud, then beneath it, as if the ground itself was swallowing me whole. I clawed at the earth, but my hands sank through it like water. The reflection stood at the shoreline, head tilted, lips curling into something too wide to be human. Behind it, the other faces pressed closer to the surface, their eyes glimmering like coins in the dark. The first rush of water hit my knees, though the lake was still several feet away. It seeped up through the soil, filling my boots, soaking my jeans. My breath came in ragged bursts, the cold wrapping around my lungs. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed instantly, devoured by the airless stillness. Then I was yanked forward, sliding across the mud without moving my legs. The lake's black water opened for me like a gaping mouth. My reflection stepped aside as I was pulled through. The cold struck like a hammer. My vision blurred. Shapes swam all around, bodies drifting in slow, graceful spirals, their faces calm, their eyes locked on me. Hands brushed against mine, tracing my skin as if memorizing it. I tried to kick toward the surface, but the water above looked impossibly far, a shimmering veil I couldn't break. The reflection appeared beside me now, no longer a mirror image, but something older, thinner, skin stretched tight over bone. Its mouth opened, and a stream of bubbles spilled out, curling upward. "Breathe," it said. And I did. The water filled me, warm now, sweet, like honey. My fear dissolved with it. My body stopped fighting. I belonged here. I had always belonged here. Sheriff Dalton's boots squelched in the mud as he scanned the lake, his flashlight beam slicing across the water. "Ethan!" he barked, voice sharp enough to cut through the night. No answer, only the slow lay of waves against the bank. Beside him, Clara stood rigid, arms wrapped around herself. "He was right here," she whispered. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. 1 second he was screaming, then gone. Dalton swept his light again, catching a flicker, something pale just beneath the surface. He stepped closer, heart pounding, but the shape slid deeper, swallowed by darkness. A low wind stirred the reeds, carrying the smell of wet stone and something metallic. The water's surface rippled, not from wind, but from something rising. Dalton's hand went to his sidearm. He'd pulled bodies from lakes before, but nothing about this felt like drowning. The air pressed heavy on his chest, each breath harder than the last. Clara staggered forward. "Wait, look," she said. Out in the center of the lake, a ring of ripples spread outward. At its heart, the water swirled in a slow, deliberate spiral. Dalton's beam caught brief flashes in the churn, hands pale as moonlight moving just beneath the surface. Then the spiral stilled, the water smoothed to glass. Dalton stepped back. "We're leaving," he said, voice low. Clara didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the water, her mouth trembling. "He's still down there," she said. "I can feel him." She took another step forward. Dalton reached for her, but she slipped from his grasp, moving into the shallows. The water closed around her legs like it had been waiting. Dalton's flashlight hit the lake again, and Clara was gone. The water wasn't cold. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. It was thick, almost warm, like it was alive and breathing with him. His lungs didn't burn. In fact, he wasn't breathing at all, yet somehow he wasn't dying. Shapes moved in the gloom, slow and deliberate. They weren't fish. They were too long, too human. Their limbs bent wrong, like broken marionettes tugged by unseen strings. One drifted closer. Its face hovered inches from his, skin pale as ash, eyes black as the spaces between stars. Its mouth opened, not to speak, but to exhale a cloud of silt that wrapped around his head. The water pressed tighter, guiding him downward. Below, the lakebed wasn't mud. It was stone, carved in spirals that glowed faintly green. The light pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Figures knelt in the spirals. Some were naked bone, others half-rotted, their hair floating like seaweed. All of them turned toward him as one, their movements slow but certain. A gap formed between them, leading to a darker pit in the stone. Something deeper waited there, its outline too vast to comprehend. He tried to move back, but hands, cold, slick, unshakable, gripped his arms. A sound bloomed in his skull, not through his ears but inside his bones. It wasn't words, but he understood it. You are chosen. The hands pulled. The pit yawned wider. Shapes within it stirred, and for the first time, Ethan felt true cold, the kind that burns from the marrow outward. The last thing he saw was a pale, skeletal jaw opening impossibly wide, before the darkness swallowed him whole. Clara didn't remember the moment her head slipped beneath the surface, only the silence that followed. No splashing, no screaming, just the slow, muffled hum of the lake as it claimed her. Her chest didn't ache. The water slid into her mouth, her lungs, yet she didn't drown. It felt like breathing air heavy with secrets. Hapes wavered in the green-black haze, limbs, faces, some familiar, though impossibly changed. She thought she saw her mother, eyes clouded, smile wrong, jaw working as if chewing on nothing. The sight should have made her scream, but something inside her was loosening, unraveling, giving in. Below, the water brightened with spiraling carvings etched into the stone floor. The spirals pulsed, drawing her downward, every throb syncing with her heartbeat until she couldn't tell which belonged to her. Figures waited there. Some had flesh, others were skeletons cloaked in drifting hair. Their mouths opened in unison, releasing streams of black silt that rose and coiled around her, cradling her like a child. A space opened between them, leading to a pit so dark it seemed to swallow the light. From its depths came a pressure, a weight in her skull, and a voice, not spoken, but felt. You are remembered. The water around her tightened, the spirals glowing brighter as the pit stirred. She saw movement, vast, impossible, and hungry. Cold rushed into her bones. She reached out, not in resistance, but curiosity, her fingertips brushing the darkness. It reached back. Her vision collapsed into black, but in the instant before it closed, she saw Ethan, his eyes wide, his mouth forming her name, being pulled into the pit alongside her. Then there was nothing but the beating of something ancient, and her heart keeping pace. Ethan's shout was the last sound before the lake fell utterly still. No wind, no ripples, only an unbroken sheet of black glass. It should have been peaceful, but the silence pressed against their eardrums, thick and wrong. Mara leaned forward on the pier, eyes locked on the spot where Clara had vanished. She's not coming up, she whispered, though it felt like the lake was swallowing her words before they reached anyone. A deep vibration trembled through the boards beneath their feet. The water shifted, not from wind, but from something moving beneath. Shapes passed under the surface, huge and slow, their outlines warping in the moonlight. Suddenly, bubbles burst through the stillness in perfect circles, expanding outward like rings in a tree trunk. The air grew heavy, metallic, tasting faintly of blood. "Get back!" Ethan yelled, though his own feet stayed rooted. He stared into the water as pale faces rose toward the surface, dozens of them, eyes open, mouths yawning wider and wider. Some he recognized from town, others were wrong, their skin split with dark veins, their hair drifting as though underwater still claimed them. The faces sank again, replaced by spirals of black silt that spread like ink, staining everything. From the center, the lake began to pulse. Each beat sent ripples racing to the shore, rattling the pier's posts. Then the light changed. The moon's reflection twisted, pulled downward as though caught in an invisible drain. The water dipped at its center, revealing a whirling, spiraling maw that glowed faintly green. Mara backed away, dragging Ethan by the arm, but his eyes stayed locked on that spiral. Somewhere deep in that churning light, he thought he saw Clara, reaching up, and then the lake swallowed the moon. The spiral didn't fade. It deepened, pulling the lake into a violent churn. Waves slammed against the pier, spraying cold water into Mara's face. She stumbled backward, clutching Ethan's sleeve, but his gaze never left the dark vortex. The sound came next, Low at first, like distant thunder rolling beneath the water, it grew louder, sharper, turning into a deep, resonant hum that made the boards beneath their feet vibrate. From the center of the whirlpool, a column of water rose, twisting like a living thing. At first it was only water, spiraling upward in defiance of gravity. Then it began to change, its surface hardening, shaping itself into something that wasn't entirely liquid. A hand emerged, too large, too long, skin the color of moonlit bone, dripping black water that steamed when it touched the lake's surface. Fingers ended in ridged, hooked talons that gouged the air as they flexed. The rest followed, a shoulder, a head crowned with fronds of slick, eel-like hair. Its face was wrong, stretched and narrow, eyes bulging and white with no pupils, scanning the shore with slow, deliberate movements. When it inhaled, the air seemed to rush away from the pier. Mara's voice cracked. "Ethan, we have to run." But Ethan didn't move. He was staring at the thing's chest, where something glimmered faintly through its translucent flesh. A pendant. Clara's pendant. The creature's gaze locked on him. Slowly, it tilted its head as though curious. Then it opened its mouth. Rows of jagged teeth unfurled, far too many for its skull, each slick with black slime. The lake roared, and the thing lunged forward, dragging the whirlpool with it. The pier shuddered as the creature's bulk slammed against it. Planks cracked beneath Mara's boots, the sound splintering through the night like gunfire. Water sprayed in a freezing sheet, blinding her. "Run!" she screamed, but Ethan was still staring at that glimmer inside the thing's chest. Only when the boards beneath him buckled did he snap out of it and bolt after her. They sprinted down the pier, every step echoing hollow and desperate. Behind them, the monster's claws scraped wood, carving long, wet grooves. Its breath came in guttural, sucking gasps, each one louder than the last. Halfway to shore, the pier tilted. The monster had seized one of the support beams. With a violent twist, it wrenched upward. Boards tore free, sending a spray of jagged splinters into the air. Mara's foot caught on a raised plank. She went down hard, palms skidding on wet wood. The cold punched into her bones. Ethan grabbed her arm, yanking her up just as another claw slammed down where her head had been, splintering the boards. They leapt the last 3 feet onto the shore. Mara stumbled into the mud, boots sinking. The smell hit her, rot thick enough to taste. The creature didn't stop at the pier. It dragged itself onto land, each movement accompanied by a sickening slurp as lake water poured from its body. Its talons gouged trenches in the earth. Mara's chest heaved. "We can't outrun that." Ethan's eyes darted to the tree line. "Maybe we don't have to." The monster lunged again, faster than it had any right to be. They plunged into the woods, branches whipping at their faces, the sound of wet, pounding pursuit never more than a breath behind. Branches clawed at Mara's face, tearing tiny lines of fire into her skin. Every step was a gamble. Roots waited like traps, mud sucked at her boots. Behind them, the thing crashed through the undergrowth, a grotesque rhythm of snappies, hitting wood and wet, sucking footfalls. They darted between massive pines, the air colder here, thick with damp moss and decay. The forest swallowed the moonlight. Shadows bled together until Mara couldn't tell where the ground ended and the trees began. Ethan grabbed her sleeve, yanking her down behind a fallen log. They crouched low, gasping silently, trying to quiet the roar of their lungs. The monster slowed. Its movements became deliberate, no more crashing, just the slow, dragging scrape of claws against bark. It was listening. A stench rolled over them, stronger now, a mix of wet earth and meat left too long in the sun. Mara's eyes watered. She clamped a hand over her mouth, terrified even her breathing might draw it closer. A branch snapped, too close. She risked a glance. In the dark, the creature's outline shifted unnaturally, as if its limbs didn't agree on which direction they should bend. The faint glimmer inside its chest pulsed, brighter than before, lighting the wet curve of its fangs. Ethan pointed toward a narrow gap between 2 leaning trees. Without a word, they crawled, the damp earth soaking through their knees. The forest seemed to tighten around them, the branches lowering like skeletal arms. A sound followed, a deep, wet inhale. It had found their scent. They broke into a small clearing, but the moonlight offered no safety. From the tree line behind them, something moved, slow and deliberate, and Mara realized the thing had been hurting them here all along. The clearing was wrong. Mara felt it the instant her boots hit the grass, too short. too perfect, as if something had manicured this space deep in the wilderness. The ground was soft underfoot, almost spongy, and the air hung heavy with a metallic tang. Ethan stopped beside her, scanning the darkness. "We're not alone," he whispered. Shapes emerged around the edges, wooden posts, half-rotted, bound together with strips of leather that looked disturbingly organic. Between them hung objects that swayed gently in the still air. At first, Mara thought they were charms until she saw the pale curve of a jawbone and the tattered ends of skin. A low vibration passed through the ground, making her knees tremble. The thing in the trees had stopped moving. Its breathing was gone. The silence pressed in until even the blood in her ears sounded too loud. Then, movement. From beyond the posts, shadows slid forward. Not the creature, but others. Human shapes, impossibly thin, their faces masked with bark and moss. They stood in a semicircle, leaving only one opening, behind Mara and Ethan, toward the forest they'd fled. The realization hit hard. This wasn't a trap meant to kill them quickly. It was a pen. One of the masked figures raised an arm. The gesture was slow, deliberate. The rest followed, pointing toward the far side of the clearing. Something massive stepped out of the dark. The monster's chest light flared, illuminating the faces of the masked figures. They weren't masks at all. The bark was fused into their skin, their eyes wide and milky. Ethan's hand found Mara's. His grip trembled. The posts around the clearing began to hum, and the spongy earth shifted beneath them like something underneath was waking. The ground buckled under Mara's feet, sending her stumbling into Ethan. The humming grew into a bone-deep vibration, rattling her teeth. Something beneath the seat. East you. Leering was moving, slow, deliberate, impossibly large. The masked figures stepped back in unison, leaving Mara and Ethan at the center, their milky eyes fixed on the ground, as if they were waiting. A crack split the earth, releasing a wave of hot, damp air that reeked of decay. The grass shriveled instantly, curling into ash. Through the widening gap, something slick and black began to emerge, a shape so vast it made the monster in the tree line seem small. The creature with the glowing chest crouched low, almost in reverence. Its massive head dipped, and Mara realized it wasn't the predator here. It was the servant. The black shape rose higher, dripping sludge that hissed where it touched the ground. Limbs, or what might have been limbs, unfurled, each joint bending the wrong way. A sound like wet fabric tearing filled the clearing. "Mara," Ethan said, voice barely audible over the rumble. "We have to run." But there was nowhere to go. The masked figures had closed ranks, their spindly bodies unnaturally still. The only opening was toward the tree line, where the glowing-chested beast waited, eyes locked on them. The thing from the earth let out a shuddering breath. The air thickened, heavy and warm, as if the clearing itself was breathing. Mara's vision blurred. Her muscles felt weak, her thoughts slow. She realized it wasn't fear. Something was draining her, pulling the strength from her body like water through a sieve. Ethan dropped to one knee. The masked figures began to chant in a language that scraped at her mind. The black shape leaned closer. It knew her name, Mara. The voice was inside her skull, low and wet, vibrating through her bones. It wasn't spoken, it was thought, forced into her mind. Ethan tried to stand, but the thing's presence pressed him back down. His eyes rolled toward her, filled with apology. The black mass shifted, and within its darkness, Mara saw faces, hundreds of them, mouths open in silent screams. Their features flickered like candle flames, fading in and out, as if they were trapped between moments. She recognized one. Sheriff Holt. His eyes pleaded. The chanting grew faster. The masked figures swayed as the glowing-chested beast crawled forward, lowering its head in submission. "You have been chosen," the voice said. "The town was the offering. You are the seal." Mara felt something coil around her legs, cold and slick. It climbed her spine, sliding beneath her skin. She gasped as her body was yanked upright, feet leaving the ground. Her heartbeat slowed until she could barely feel it. Ethan shouted her name, lunging, but one of the masked figures moved, too fast, too wrong, and held him back with a single skeletal hand. The black shape opened, revealing a core of shifting red light, like molten rock beneath water. It pulled at her, not physically, but from the inside, dragging her soul toward it. For a moment, she saw everything. The town's disappearance, the rituals, the centuries of sacrifices, and then she understood. She wouldn't die. She would remain, like the faces inside, aware but powerless, a whisper in the dark forever. Her last sight was Ethan breaking free, running toward her. Too late. The light swallowed her. When Ethan fell to his knees, the clearing was empty. No masked figures, no monster, just silence, and the faint echo of her voice. The corridor narrowed until the walls seemed to press in on me, damp stone brushing my shoulders. My flashlight's beam trembled across the floor, picking up the slick gleam of water or blood seeping through the cracks. The air was so cold it bit into my teeth when I breathed. Something moved ahead, not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A shape hunched low, its limbs too long, its movements deliberate. It didn't walk, it flowed. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but my legs carried me forward, slow and unwilling, like I was walking into my own grave. The smell hit me first, rot, copper, and something sharp, chemical. My flashlight flickered, and in that strobing moment, I saw its face, or what was left of it, skin peeled away in ragged strips, hollow eyes, not empty but filled with a glistening blackness that pulsed like it was alive. It whispered my name, not in the air but inside my skull. The voice felt wet, crawling down the inside of my mind, pushing at memories I'd buried years ago. I stepped back. The floor gave way beneath my heel. The sound of splintering wood echoed like a gunshot. I fell, down into the dark. The thing followed, not leaping, not rushing, just descending after me like gravity didn't apply. When I hit bottom, my flashlight shattered. The world went black. My breath came fast, ragged, and in the pitch dark, I heard it breathing with me, perfectly in sync. Somewhere above, the corridor sealed itself shut. I was never getting out. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't been hunting it. It had been guiding me here from the start. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was close. The air felt heavier with each breath, thick as tar in my lungs. My hands groped along the floor, cold stone slick with something warm. The scent told me it wasn't water. A faint glow ignited in the dark, not from my light but from its eyes, those pits of living blackness. They swelled, drowning out the darkness around them until they were all I could see. My mind screamed at me to look away, but my body didn't obey. The voice returned, louder now, dragging jagged syllables through my thoughts. It spoke of things buried in the earth long before people came here. It promised release, but the kind of release that felt like being unstitched from the inside out. It moved closer. I could hear the faint slap of its limbs on the stone, the wet stretch of tendons. My back hit a wall. There was nowhere left to go. The glow engulfed me, and my memories began to unravel. Faces I'd loved fading, places I'd been erasing one by one. My name slipped away next. I clung to it, repeating it in my head, but the syllables dissolved. I wasn't me anymore. It reached out, and when its fingers, if you could call them that, touched my chest, there was no pain. Only a terrible stillness, as if my heart had forgotten what it was supposed to do. The last thing I heard before everything went silent was its whisper. You were always mine. And then, nothing. The dark didn't fade. It swallowed me whole. They found my truck 3 days later, still idling on the road outside the town's edge. The driver's side door hung open, dust swirling lazily in the wind. No footprints, no signs of a struggle. The search parties combed the streets, but the town was exactly as I had first seen it, silent, intact, abandoned. Coffee cups sat half-finished in diners, curtains swayed in open windows, but no one was there to move them. The air was stale, like it had been trapped for decades. Sheriff McCall swore he heard voices in the old courthouse. When they went inside, the sound vanished, replaced by the faint hum of something deep underground. They never found the source. Weeks passed. The town remained empty. They declared it another ghost town, the kind people whisper about but never visit. Sometimes, though, travelers say they've seen a figure standing at the edge of Main Street after dusk. A man, frozen in place, eyes reflecting faint blue light. He doesn't speak, doesn't move. If you look too long, they say, the shadows behind him start to shift. And if you keep looking, you don't come back. They never remember my name in those stories. maybe that's for the best.